So you studied computer science at Deakin. I'm guessing Deakin in Geelong.
Deakin in Geelong, yeah. Just down the road. Yeah.
Just down the road.
Yeah.
Began Ticketmaster as a web dev, and then you seemed to pivot towards digital strategy when you started at Visual Jazz, and you sort of were overseeing a bunch of things, but particularly like Holden, GM Holden, Defence Force recruiting, and then Starcom, which is where you met your founding partners at for Hotglue.
Yep.
But there you were sort of digital manager of media strategy, planning and activation. Bunch of stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, Starcom, I started there in 2007 and was brought on initially to sort of look after the Holden account, the digital side of the Holden account.
Yeah.
They had just won it maybe 6 months earlier and were looking to sort of bolster their digital capability in the Melbourne office. So I was working on the Holden account at Visual Jazz, which then became Isobar down the track, and got to know a few of the guys at Starcom because we were working sort of together on the same account, and then got an offer to go across there and sort of jumped at it. Now, I'd spent 7 years at Visual Jazz and loved it. It started there when they were a really small business, only sort of a handful of people, and watched them grow really quickly. And I think when I left, there was 70 or 80 people. Like, it really sort of skyrocketed in a 6 or 7 year period. They sold to Dentsu, or sold to Mitchell's at the time, which became Aegis, and then Dentsu, and the evolution of that, and then they changed names. But yeah, sort of they picked up Holden, and I was involved in that business, met the guys at Starcom, and went across to, the dark side of media, as it was called at the time. But it was interesting, like digital media back then was very much the, you were sort of brought into the room as the guru, as sort of the expert, on digital, and it was kind of that sort of foreign kind of media. And so, I spent a lot of time just educating and trying to convince brands to spend money and to increase their spend, and to sort of see the relevance of digital as part of their wider marketing mix. So, that discussion has changed significantly in the sort of 10 to 12 years since I started at Starcom. But it was a really interesting time, like a lot of it was, that you'd get a budget for a campaign, launch a new car, whatever, you might have $5, $6, $7 million with a Holden at the time. The traditional guys would be, right, cool, we need 80%, 90% of that for TV, for outdoor, for radio, for, those kind of traditional kind of channels. And whatever's left,
it just goes
digital guys, off you go. You go and do what you can with a couple $100,000 or, 5% of the budget. And that was kind of what it was when I started. It was like, 4 or 5% of their total marketing spend was spent in digital. And in the space of, 3 years at Starcom, 2 or 3 years at Starcom, that went from 5% of Holden spend to 14 or 15% of their spend. Right. And so they really kind of embraced it. And I was really proud to be part of that discussion and that journey to sort of get them to really start to invest heavily, not just in media, digital media, but also their digital technology. I mean, they were just getting on board with social at the time. Facebook pages kind of only just came into existence around, 2007, 2008, or thereabouts.
Okay, so they were sort of getting in there in the early days, which is fair.
Yeah. Look, they had a good team internally who were keen to push digital. So they had as a business, they had seen that there was an opportunity here, and they were investing in staff, and they were getting a lot of, given their GM links as well from the States. They were getting a lot of encouragement from the US, because the US is probably, maybe a year or two ahead at that stage. So they were getting a lot of encouragement from the US to invest in those kind of channels, and so it was good to be part of that journey and that discussion and help guide them to, they're no longer in business now, so to
the promised land.
Yeah.
Do you remember? When was the moment when you started to realise that clients' perspective was shifting? When you go on those meetings and the traditional media guys would be like, we need 80%, and they'd just be like, yep, to those moments of pushback and them starting to move that number higher and higher?
Yeah, there was a really distinct moment, and it was probably late 2009, I reckon. And there was a senior marketing, I think his role was the sales marketing director at the time at Holden. And he was a really, good, tough marketer, and really, you know, like questioned everything you were doing, whether it's digital or traditional, it didn't matter. He kept you on your toes, right? And from an agency perspective, you sort of want that, because you don't want to just breeze through and just, you know, sell whatever and you know, wipe your hands of it and away you go. You want to be held accountable, right? And he was really good at doing that. And I'd spent a year and a half like just pushing uphill to convince this guy about the benefits of digital in all sorts of things, search, you know, display, you know, video, everything that was going on at the time. And I think he might have gone to the States for a, you know, business trip or whatever. And he came back, and his whole kind of perception and attitude on digital had sort of shifted in a very short amount of time.
Wow.
And I sort of felt like all the things that I'd been saying for the last 18 months kind of clicked with him. And, you know, whether it was me saying it or whether he'd heard from, you know, people over in the States or, you know, a variety of sources, I don't know. But there was a definite shift. And all of a sudden, he was putting the same amount of pressure and, you know, kind of accountability on the traditional guys, if not more, than he was on digital. And it was almost like the digital budget was kind of the safe, like, let's start there. And then, okay, why are we doing that TV show? Why are we using these guys as an outdoor partner? Like his line of questioning kind of shifted in the space of a couple of weeks. And I really felt like a sense of accomplishment that he had come on that journey, and he was willing to come on that journey as well. So,
wow.
So that was a good time. And I knew at that point that it's going to be a lot easier to increase our spend in the digital
and also
space.
that the bet you'd made personally on this space was the right one. It would have reaffirmed that belief.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always kind of been quite bullish on digital.
You would have always had the conviction, but, you know, when you have moments like that.
Yeah, when you can sit in a boardroom with, you know, a senior marketer like that who's in control of one of the larger budgets in the country, you know, advertising budgets in the country, and you've seen their sort of transformation sort of before your eyes. That was a good sort of moment to experience. And at that stage, I was like, okay, well, you know, if this guy can be convinced and he can, you know, see where this is going, then I had a bit of faith in what I was saying, but also I knew that same conversation could be had with anyone really in the advertising space, and no matter how staunch they were around, you know, their beliefs on where media was, you know, there's probably a way to make an argument.
There's a really interesting topic that my producer and I went over before when we prepped all your questions, and I'm reading this book recently. It's got such a weird name, but I forgot it. And I just want to, because I don't come from an industry background in the sense that I've worked for brands in marketing and sales roles. I've never been a creative per se or gone into agency land. That's always been my partner's remit. Mm-hmm. And so I was just reading this book, and it's apart from like the copy book that everyone talks about for getting into advertising, this is the other book that supposedly you read. It's like called Whipple Pinch or Whipple Stink or something like that. Some weird name, but it's really interesting because the recent version, the fifth edited version, is talking about digital. So it must have been published like around the time you were at these agencies.
Yep.
And it talks about the way to go about advertising in the digital world. Like a lot of agencies were just taking the creative teams they had today and then trying to do the same stuff you did in traditional on these digital platforms.
Yep.
And you sort of see that now today. Like we were just looking at some competitor ads in the social space, some of the competitors in that smaller area like ours. And it's all just like, you know, emojis, you know, pushing all like these bulk number of text references and line upon line of information. And this guy was talking about the fact that there will come a time in digital, which is now, I believe, where things have gone from it just being a new thing of people getting in, you know, and all the ads are just like whoever can get an ad for this niche topic will be the best and they'll kill it in this area, to now it's like complete saturation of these digital ads. So we're almost getting to this point now where digital media, digital ads, digital social advertising is the advertising. You know, like traditional now I feel is, unless you're a mass media brand, becoming more and more irrelevant. So I was, he and I were curious, like, what are your thoughts on the challenges in the last, let's say, 18, 24 months that you've noticed about standing out more in digital? Has it gotten harder? Has it changed in any way that you felt?
I mean, if you just think purely about the amount of money that's going to social and digital media, then absolutely it's going to be harder to stand out, or it's going to cost more to stand out, right? Because just the influx of dollars,
has changed, hasn't it?
Has changed, yeah. I mean, like the amount of time spent on these platforms and the amount of engagement on these platforms hadn't changed a whole lot in the last couple of years in comparison to where the dollars have flown come in. And I think COVID's had a big impact on that. Like especially in the last 8 months, we've seen from our own agency's perspective, clients that would have spent money on traditional media, if budgets have been either parked or shrunk, then it kind of removes the ability to spend money in traditional media. So you're left with maybe half the budget you started with, but then all of a sudden, rather than spending 25% of that budget on social and digital, now it's 100% of the budget on social and digital. And so the social and digital budget has actually increased in comparison. So, it doesn't mean that TV and outdoor and other traditional media is not relevant anymore. I think there's absolutely a place for these media, at the right times. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot more competition. The other interesting thing too, which kind of contradicts what I've just said, but in March and April, we noticed a huge decline in the CPMs that we were getting on, programmatic style media in particular, because our inference was that you've got airlines, companies like Holden, businesses like that all of a sudden just took out like all of their spending in those platforms. They just basically turned off.
Yeah, it was existential. They had to.
Yeah, which kind of meant that all of a sudden there's this hole in the market where a percentage of the spend was coming from, all of a sudden just disappears. So the supply and demand kind of algorithm around programmatic was like, well, there's a hell of a lot more supply than there is demand now. So the prices kind of dropped pretty significantly in a fairly short amount of time, and I haven't seen a bigger shift in rates in my time, even back in 2008 when the GFC was happening like that. There wasn't that sort of shift, and at least it wasn't measurable as it was now.
How have you found like the recovery of that CPM since that period?
Yeah, I think the drop happened. There was a bit of uncertainty around the industry for a month or two, sort of late March, April. And I think since sort of May, June, it's kind of steadily sort of started to come back to life. That's in Australia. I mean, I'm obviously much more focused in Australia than other parts of the world. I'm not sure what's happening in the US. I mean, the election probably had a massive impact on what's happening in the media space over there. But yeah, it's definitely slowly sort of come back. I mean, you're still missing a lot of those big advertisers that in the travel and sort of hospitality space. But
yeah, well, it's interesting what you said before about how by necessity there's brands that have pulled their advertising, but then by necessity there were brands that could still go forward. You think about large brands like your Safeway, Coles, Woolies. They still need to spend that money, and they're actually their business is up 150% year on year. So they've got to do something, because otherwise, next year they lose that budget.
Yeah, that's right. And that's always the sort of weird one.
If
isn't
they
it?
don't spend it,
don't spend it, you don't get it again. I mean, there's always clients that are like that, and a lot, there's always the discussions we have with clients come June or, depending on how they do their calendars, December, where they need to get rid of a bit of money, and so they'll maybe pre-bill it for the following year and go on like that. But, I mean, we were lucky as an agency. A lot of our clients weren't in the travel and hospitality space. We had a lot of clients in the FMCG space. A couple in the automotive space. Beauty is a big sort of area that we focus on as well. And thankfully,
that would be huge.
Yeah, thankfully, a lot of those guys didn't retract their spending. They sort of sometimes doubled down on it, and really made it work.
I was looking at that. Those specific areas when you're looking at the founding of the business, and we've got FMCG, which would have been huge, automotive, would have been slightly down depending on the brand. Retail down. NFP would have been probably the same, but beauty and services would have been massively up.
Yeah, up in digital and social. You know, like they've pulled back a bit in their traditional spending, and you know, one of our largest clients is L'Oreal, and has been for a number of years, and we sort of specifically focus on the social, digital, and content space for those guys. We're not as involved in the media side of things. They have a relationship with another media agency for that. But what's been really interesting is that where they may have spent money on other traditional forms, it kind of seems to have swung across to social and digital because, everything is now e-com. Everything is home delivered. There's a big push in that sort of space, which is we've luckily been in a good place to make that happen. So.